When I was 21 years old, I graduated from university. I thought I was God's gift to marketing because I was young and confident. And I moved to Queenstown to live the dream. And I started a company with my flatmates. We were selling organic produce from a farm in the Catlins and looking to do tourism and a whole bunch of really cool things. And we sent it. We had an investor, like a managing director kind of space, and we were. Hi, Laura. Great to see you. Um, I'm just better to see. Great. Appreciate that, Laura. So we kicked off this company and we sent it. I was the marketing kind of manager, marketing director, whatever you want to call it. And we were, from the outset, it looked like the company was pumping. We did like press releases and like whatever they're called, collaborations with chefs. We were in newspapers, built this website from the brand side of things. Everything looked like super cool. And but behind the scenes we started bleeding cash, and because we were kind of a self-funded startup, while we had an investor, we were still all kind of putting our own cash and time into this business to get it going. And yeah, long story short, it was really interesting because we were so passionate about this business. We had this sign on the wall, this Walt Disney sign. I remember it vividly. It said, "If you can dream it, you can do it." I remember we were just so passionate and so like hungry. And yeah, where the cash runway was kind of running out. And then one day I had this defining moment. I got this phone call from one of the other directors and said, "Hey, actually, we've not kept track of a couple of things that well, and we're actually in a lot more debt to one of our main suppliers than we realized. It's actually so bad that we are pretty well insolvent. Like, we're not fit to trade. We're burning too much cash, and we likely need to shut the company down." Don't judge me. I was driving at the time. I pulled over and I was like just about in tears. I was like, "Oh man, how did we end up here? We were working so hard, like night and day, putting everything into this, and now we're staring down the barrel of a bill. Like, this is real. I'm a director. I'm liable." And I called a friend who's a business mentor and like a coach to me at the time. And he said, "Cool, you are a director. You are liable. Here's how we can do this." And he helped guide us through this transition. And sure enough, we exited the company with a bill to pay. And so this is Peter. Great to see you. Thank you. So this was like a very real defining moment in my career as a marketer, where at the core of what we're talking about today is a measurement problem. And I believe in the old kind of business adage that Peter Drucker is saying, like, if you measure it, you can manage it. And in this space, optimizing for AI visibility is a massive measurement problem. We're going to dive into this in a lot of detail in a moment. And the challenge that we've got is, can you tie it to revenue? Yes, there's kind of these metrics to understand and understand what you're doing in this space, but we're looking and we're closely monitoring and scraping the web and following the thought leaders in this space around the world around actually correlating this work to business outcomes, because it's just such a big black box. And so this space, like that story for me, was the realization of, if you are not measuring the right things, like if business goes up or business goes down and you can't tell why in your data, you are not measuring the right things. And so in this session, I'm going to dive into actually ensuring, first of all, understanding how your brand is turning up in AI, and then look at some of those measurement challenges, and then look at some of the solutions. So sound good? You're with me? And we're also going to look at a real example. The first thing I need to start off with is why care. And I want to cover off a few different angles for you to think about this. Number one is that your board or your leadership team should want to know what you're doing in this space. This is largely because they probably personally have started using these tools themselves. And this is the big shift, because these tools have been around for years now. But what we've seen, the biggest shift we're seeing, is that your leadership team are using these tools. They just plan their next holiday using ChatGPT. And so they're kind of starting to think, hey, what's our business doing? How are we turning up in this space? The second thing is that sessions are typically declining or flat, depending on your SEO strategy. Will depend on, it's a great point, Sophie. We got a thumbs up there. Depending on your SEO strategy, depends on the decline or your traffic strategy. But typically, as far as organic goes, it's in decline, or at best, it's flat, unless you've got a crazy growth strategy in play. We know that LLM, like AI referral traffic for a lot of sites that we look at, I did a quick scan. I looked at roughly 30 different medium to large organizations across New Zealand and Australia, and I found that on average, LLM traffic was typically below 1%. But that is not the full story, and that's not the full story. Number 4 is that broken data. And typically, business strategy is summed up as this of like, okay, what's working? Okay, do more of that. What's not? Let's do less of that. We've got limited resources. And the catch is if you don't have visibility around what is working right now and what is not, you're going to plateau and you're not able to do smarter marketing. You're not going to get that promotion, that pay rise, change the world, sail off into the sunset and live happily ever after. So we need to get you that visibility. And number 5 is, like I said, the adoption of this is massive. And that's a nice segue. There's a report that came out by SimilarWeb. I've got a link here in the slides. Definitely recommend checking it out. This 2026 Gen AI landscape. This is the first time we had some kind of data. SimilarWeb has a huge web scraping program. And when these numbers came out, and this is barely a month old, the numbers were staggering. And what's even more staggering is the actual uptake of people using these tools. These numbers are too big for my little brain, like 9.5 billion and 4.4 billion, but this up 70%. I just want to visualize that. This is again from that same report. But the state of growth for these platforms is where it's really crazy. So obviously within app downloads and people's relationships with these apps, and then people still using these platforms in AI browsers is absolutely massive. I want to just kind of give you, this is another similar space which helps you also understand the scale of search. And that's also not to be underestimated, Google and Gemini's role in this space, especially as far as commercial moments go. ChatGPT, yes, has some powerful stats. Around 1 in 5 people using ChatGPT are using it for purchasing decisions, and they're getting ready to buy. And so that's their kind of stat around the space. But let me try and help you understand the volume of these numbers. So ChatGPT reports 900 million weekly active users. And I just imagine this. I want you to imagine every single person in the European Union, and then every single person in the United States of America, and every single person in all of Australia, and every single person in New Zealand, every week going to ChatGPT. The volume of those populations does not even equate to 900 million. That is literally how many people every week are using these tools. Gemini is reporting 900 million monthly active users, not weekly, slightly different. But again, their search function is reporting at roughly 3.3 billion. Again, it's a number that we can't actually fathom how often people are using these tools. And so what you need to be thinking about is how many of those are my customers? Because I've got a chart, there's a high bet that are more, potentially more than we want to acknowledge, are actually making purchasing consumer decisions in these interfaces. And this is absolutely critical for you thinking about, especially as you report to your leaders and your business strategy. You think about this channel, understanding the growth trajectory this is on, and actually that this is one of the biggest shifts we're seeing in the change in the customer journey. You can dive deep into this and how this is specifically changing. The travel industry is massive. Finance is massive. E-com has its own shift with AI being integrated into these tools as well. That's a whole nother conversation I haven't gone into here. But the numbers are huge and they're worth leaning into. So this brings us to the discipline of generative engine optimization, or answer engine optimization. There's all these acronyms, but either way, when it's got this kind of engine optimization, the process is actually fairly well established. It's actually, GEO is probably now considered almost like a formalized industry now. Google itself has put out its kind of like AI optimization guide, kind of giving us a bunch of credibility. And it's a really exciting time. But this process is well established. Step 1 is you generate a prompt library. A prompt library is effectively almost like thinking about it like keyword research, maybe if you're familiar with SEO. But a prompt library is thinking about all the different ways in which people might prompt or type into these chat bots, these AI chat interfaces, and what they might be asking these tools. Then we query these prompts against the tools and we look at the responses, and then we analyze the responses. Now, from there, we measure, we report, and we repeat. And so that established. So if you search like GEO, you go to Gemini and say, what is GEO? The process is relatively well established. And the recommendations are relatively you can just go best practice and say add schema markup, do entity optimization, internal linking, digital strategy, PR. Like that side of it is getting fairly well established, but we have a huge measurement problem. And I don't just say this as like, I don't know. I feel like I personally got really fatigued with all the AI hype bros being like, AI is going to change everything. And then when someone's like, maybe it's not, and everyone's like, oh, phew, someone's actually being honest about this space. So when I say we have a big measurement problem, I'm not just being like honest. I want to show you actually why this is so complicated to measure and why no one has actually cracked it. The number one is that models change. So we've tracked over 10,000 prompts now over a large period of time for some pretty notable brands. And what we've seen is the biggest shifts in the results is often when the model changes. When ChatGPT went from 4.5 to 5, it was like, whoa, the reports and what we were measuring for these brands and these interfaces had huge kind of leap shifts and changes. But we didn't do anything. That wasn't our GEO work. The model just got smarter. The other space, a lot of people don't realize this, but an LLM tool is, most of them are non-deterministic. That's a fancy word, non-deterministic, which means that you get a different output with the same input. So you can do the same prompt and then do the exact same prompt again. And this might be querying the API. Not obviously your context would change it, but the tool is always returning a different response. So from a scientific measurement perspective, that becomes really hard to understand if you're affecting change if the output is always changing because of temperature, because of the way these models predict what they're going to say. These tools are also testing a lot. So I was in a room full of large people and I said, right, everyone get your phones out, go to ChatGPT, and I want you to type in this prompt. And every single person in the room had a different response. Not a single person had the same. People had different formats. Some people had tables. Some people had images. Some people had like long form paragraphs, that type of space. And so we're like, whoa, this is really tricky from a measurement perspective. And this is even the same. So like I'm saying, this is even the same. So even if you go to a new, so we had some people said, go sign up to a new tool you haven't used. Maybe you haven't used Perplexity. Go to Perplexity and try that tool out where it doesn't have your context in your memory. And we're still seeing different responses. And so that, and I also want to, the other space is that we are seeing context and memory heavily personalized responses. If I was to summarize SEO, like 10 years of being an SEO nerd, I would say people use Google because it's the best answer to the question. It's the best answer to the intent behind what people want to know. And that's why we return back to these platforms. The reason we're starting to adopt these AI platforms is because they are the best answer to the query, to the prompt. And the way that these LLMs are doing that, we're going to look at this in more detail in a second, is a lot of it is to do with the context and the memory that it understands about your situation. The other space is where like a Google Premium, like a Google certified agency, and your average kind of head keyword length is kind of 2.9, let's say 3 words long. What we're seeing is in these kind of AI interfaces, average search lengths sitting around 20 plus words. So this is a massive shift in the way that people are interacting with these machines, because we're going from this like keyword behavior to this really conversational long form. This is personalization at new depths. It's no longer I have a family. It's I got a 1-year-old and I got a 3-year-old. Personalize the answer based on my exact situation. So again, how do you measure that? This is a big measurement challenge. So when someone's like, we've cracked this, it's like, well, how? This is some big problems, right? I want to just take this a step further. I've been geeking out of how LLMs actually work, and this is a lot of the way we do this GEO space. Is you try to reverse engineer what's happening, and so we're going to look at banking for this talk. So I've made up a bank called Ko-Fi Bank for the sake of this as an example, and I want you to imagine that someone goes to ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, whatever your tool is, Claude, and you say, which bank has the best home loan rate for a first home buyer? And so I want you to remember like what we're trying to do when we're trying to optimize your brand to influence these responses for commercial outcomes. What we're trying to do is influence this like kind of AI model. And this is what we've been learning about how these actual agentic, this kind of this RAG, retrieval augmented generation process goes. And what happens is, so the prompt comes in, and then this little LLM, in a matter of split seconds, plans and routes the work. It's going to take your prompt, it's going to split it into a bunch of potential sub-questions, and behind the scenes, it's going to do a live web fetch. and we can often see if an LLM does that. And then it's doing often what's called a vector search. Vectorizing, probably the most simple way to explain vectorizing is if you imagine there's a huge amount of information, and they're just breaking it up into categories, and they're kind of cataloging it against little numbers. And so a machine kind of goes, okay, we know that this is the subjects, and then it retrieves a whole bunch of those numbers to very quickly understand a lot of information very quickly. And then it does a whole keyword search often on its own database, and in places that LLM will actually query an API. We know that tools like ChatGPT have a relationship with Booking.com, with these certain platforms. And when information is very time critical, e.g. understanding pricing, understanding certain information, they're looking for these type of sources, and in places they have integrations. And so the little LLM makes this plan, and then it retrieves this information, and it retrieves it in what they call chunking. So if you've pushed into the space and you've heard anyone talk about K chunking, K is just a fancy word in programming to say any number, and it's just saying it gives us a chunk of information. And what happens is your content needs to survive this chunking process. So it's going to read your web page, and then it's going to go, okay, well, this is the information that I'm looking for around home loan rates and what your bank offers, what your business offers. And if that information is too verbose or not succinct enough, you're going to get halfway put through the chunk, and then it's going to get dropped. Then these little LLMs have its own built-in critic, where it's going to then retrieve the response, check it against the pure personalization in your context, and if it's missing information, it's going to go back and retrieve that information, and then it's going to present that answer to you with its citations and with what's informed it. So when we say, hey, let's do GEO, we're like, this is some insane technology that we're trying to understand how it works. This is to the point of people like scraping Google's like patent libraries and then recreating these whole, like rebuilding LLMs to understand. This is super nerdy stuff, but we're trying to get your brand's content to survive this agentic loop. This is not an easy task, is what I'm hoping you're hearing me say. So this is really interesting. So across some of our work in the space, we've had two organizations, quite large organizations, that we've seen that are indexed by Google, but not by AI bots. So there's a big question here is like you might be well indexed in Google, but don't take for granted actually some of your organizations are not entirely indexable by all of these AI kind of bots, these little Perplexity, OpenAI, Anthropic bots kind of cruising around the internet. You need to make sure that your website has access to them. That is the starting line. So for some of you, you need to go and like check that right now, maybe. I'm sure most of you are fine in that space. We've seen wrong customer service numbers showing. We've seen AI citing about entire services that didn't even exist. In this case, it was referencing an old press release about a service, but again, a bit dated. But this is risky stuff from a governance, from an accuracy space. I was even reading a case study about AI citing a brand's own content on why not to purchase their own brand. This is a new space. This is a complicated space to be operating in. But the catch is we need to do something. Like I said, the numbers, the uptake is huge. You know that consumer decisions are being made, or certain types of decisions, or certain markets prefer this type of information. Other consumer decisions are made entirely off social, entirely off what your friends say. It depends on the nature of decision, but for certain what I call like life cycle moments, or we specialize in longer customer journeys, higher ticket purchases, e.g. travel, tourism, home loans, finance. Like we specialize in these longer customer journeys where there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of this space, and we know that these tools are heavily disrupting these industries. We had the opportunity to rebuild a website completely, almost from like an SEO geo-led space, and the outcome was huge. So what we are seeing is that this space matters. And the other thing here that is not necessarily in here as well. So yes, this is measuring a brand in like an AI prompt tracking tool, but we're also seeing this in like you've got a Gen AI report in Google Search Console. You've now got your AI assistant kind of again this LLM referral traffic in GA4, but it's still a proxy. Bing Search Console is actually probably got the best data in terms of understanding an intent group by volume that people are getting information in their kind of AI interface. And so we've got these other kind of metrics of proxies as well that have all improved from doing this work. So what I am trying to say is, while this is a hard space, don't lose hope. Here's what we can do about it. So I want to give you, this is just our take on the solution. And I hope this really gets you thinking a lot about, we've got a big problem. We've got a huge shift in consumer behavior. We've got to do something about it. So let's go. Our solution is to develop a prompt library that represents the many, many ways in which your customers may use AI chats. So around the world, what we have seen is while the responses are always different, and if you're a marketer, you'll understand this, we're still seeing the same brands be pulled up. The interface is changing, the language is changing slightly, but the same brands are still turning up. Similar content is still being cited, and we're still seeing it basically work segment led. So I'll give you a really simple example from the tourism industry. So again, I'm in a room, so everyone get your phone out, prompt top things to do in Queenstown. And what we see is, where are we? Nora prompts this prompt, and her top thing to do is a scenic heli flight. She works in it's Nora here. Hi, Nora, if you are. She works in high-end luxury accommodation. So her space is personalized because, aviation is not on everyone's budget, but for her clientele, that is probably one of the number one things to do in the region. Then we're seeing people with family. We're seeing operators like Skyline that are really family friendly be the number one recommended. Your solo travelers. We're seeing this tailored by what solo travelers might actually more be. So we're still seeing this relative kind of segmentation influence the results. And we're still seeing what I'd call in terms of a taxonomy, the way you organize information. If someone says, hey, I want to go to Queenstown and I want to chill, what we're still seeing is chill is kind of relax, and therefore it's suggesting more passive relaxation things to do. And so we can still, while this is an incredible measurement challenge that everything needs to be, I think you're right to be a skeptic in this space, because when someone comes and says, we've got a solution, we can measure it, we're like, really? Because this is hard. And then, so we're generating this prompt library based on your segmentation, your actual products, your life cycle, your customer journey, the customer language, and then this kind of search in SEO, search volume data, and PAA means people also ask data. So we're taking all this information, and in Claude, we've developed a system to generate a prompt library. I want to give you an example. So in our case of this bank, the variations need to capture the many different intents. So in this case, we've kind of got best bank for first home buyer. Then we've got, instead of home buyer, we've got mortgage, which is, again, similar space, slightly different language, similar intent. Hi, Nora. Thank you. Best low deposit. So we're starting to change the language. And the idea is that this one group needs to represent all the slight different nuances, because what we are seeing is you can ask the same question, but with a slightly different language and get a slightly different response. So we want to capture some of that language in a very robust prompt library, because the garbage in, garbage out. So we're really big on develop a robust prompt library to understand this kind of space. And then once you have a robust prompt library, you can be more confident in what you're measuring and making business decisions on it. So hopefully you can see this all right. This is, let me just make that a bit bigger, is in this example, we have first home buyers, and there's this discovery phase. How much deposit, and they need to, the home buying finance journey starts with this exploration around how much can I afford? This is where, people that start getting serious about the space, and then they move into this comparing shortlist around finding a loan provider. Then they move into pre-approval. Then there's the actual application, the purchase, and then there's these other kind of these changes in the moments. And so by working through a customer journey, we start to think about all the different key commercial moments that a business is integrating with this. And so we're just such big fans of life cycle or customer journey or path to purchase based measurement, because this helps you ring fence a moment and ring fence an intent. And then all of a sudden you've got clarity around how your brand is performing in these really critical moments. Because if someone says, how's my business performing in AI? You're like, what product, what customer, what moment? This is literally the questions you need to actually have anything insightful or actionable. And so we're big fans of taking this type of model, creating this grid, and then generating the prompt library. This is also the prompt library. This is also foundational for the future of your content strategy. As more and more people interact with brands through machines, ensuring that your brand has answered the question is a very important role in this kind of digi content CX product team space. And so that eventually, as kind of agentic e-commerce and Google's kind of universal commerce protocol comes to life, this side of space is going to be really interesting, because if you're not answering the question, the machine is making it up or someone else is answering it. And so we think it's really important that brands start this evolution. All right. Well, no, I want to go back to my hi, and then I go back to here. So this is the thing on the customer journey. We're running out of time. So I want to show you very quickly what this looks like. So I couldn't actually put in Ko-Fi Bank. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly because I think it's nice to see what this actually looks like. Whoa, Inception. Can you see this all right?
Yep.
All right. So in this case, we're loading up the prompts. This is some prompts around kind of this like home loan, comparing these home loans. And then in here, this is still like rendering properly because it was just like this was an example that we haven't fully built out. But here's the prompt, compare home loan rates for 600K in New Zealand. And then we can see in ChatGPT, this is using a virtual machine. ChatGPT's done, it's interesting to see this was the prompt. But it's interesting to see that ChatGPT searched for NZ home loan interest rates, owner occupied, August 2026, major banks 1 year fixed. So as far as your kind of content strategy, that in itself is really interesting. Then we can see the table, we can see the recommendations here, which is very tailored to August, and then we can see all of the URLs that have informed this. And then we could see, say, Copilot or Gemini, and normally we'd have Claude and a whole bunch of others in here. From here, we then take this and we export these results, and then this is what we're using to inform this content strategy. But if you think about this, if your prompt library is flawed, as you go to optimize in this space, the input for your content strategy and your digital strategy is going to be flawed. And this is why we think having that model and getting clarity around those moments is just the game changer for marketing in general. And this is just in general. This isn't just for AI. This is just for every channel that you measure. Where are they in the purchasing journey? Goes you from noise to signal. This is how you go from like a messy middle to clarity and actual being able to drive better business outcomes in a measurable fashion. So hopefully that's an example of actually seeing how the prompt library gets loaded in, and then you get these metrics. Here's your rank, your share of voice, your position, your search volume, and then effectively to kind of answer the question as well. I just want to very quickly before we do this, I want to show you this. So effectively, if you imagine, we've got your AI metrics. So in this case, we've got for example, you've got a discovery prompt set, and we're tracking just how your brand is doing in discovery because everything else is just too unactionable. And so we want to know for this product, for home loan only, not your term deposit, not your credit, just for home loan, just discovery in this space. And this might be even more specific around that kind of like pre-approval interest rate type space. So you've got these prompt sets, and then we're tracking how some of these core metrics are trending over time. We might want to track AI bot traffic to your site. And then as we move into this consideration, we have a consideration prompt set. We've got your AI impressions from Google Search Console and Gen AI. We've got your AI referral sessions. And then we may have some other kind of SEO metrics. And this space actually allows you to do cross-channel analysis, and also over time allows you to see as say, for example, your web sessions might be declining, but if you start to see this kind of baseline performance alongside this in your AI tools, you can actually start to correlate the channel switch that is happening. Because for a lot of organizations, they're not losing market share. The customer journey is just changing. And so for us, measuring different channels on top of each other, specific to the buying moment. So this is the same thing. When we report on SEO, we're going into Google Search Console and we're filtering the keywords by the intent group. And we're running intent group against these other intent groups from, for example, paid. And this is how we're getting clarity across the customer journey. And now, just also to just summarize kind of like measurement marketing strategies, every single person who buys goes through a journey, and you can't skip this. You can't go from like not being aware, not pre-approved to signing up for a mortgage. You have to go through this process. And so this having visibility on how your audiences are moving, sort of velocity through your purchasing cycle is probably one of the more powerful things you can ever see as a marketer. And then I'm just going to take that off. And then as you see, all of the metrics alongside each other, you can prioritize accordingly. And within that, typically we're saying drive traffic to a platform that converts. Like make sure your offer is clear in this lower funnel space before you invest in brand. Well, people want to understand about tracking brand, but this type of interface, when you're tracking brand at sort of top of funnel or discovery, because brand is actually technically through all of your touch points, this is where we start to get clarity and make serious business decisions. We call this data for strategy at Data Story. So I just want to jump back to my slides. Sure. Yeah. So hopefully, again, I can't see you, so I don't know what you're thinking. That's the LRM's demo. So this space here for measuring your brand and GEO, that intent grouping space, evaluating the behavior, tracking who is being cited, what content is doing that, and letting that inform your report is fairly well established. What we're seeing that's really interesting, and from a marketing leader space, what's really interesting is this cross-functional alignment and this data being shared throughout your organization. Because what we're seeing is that, for example, you've kind of got search, but this is also impacting content, this is impacting product, PR, and a wider digital footprint is something we're seeing massively influence a business's performance in this space. It's less in spaces, it's much less about your website. And then there's also brand. We're seeing there's a space in GEO called entity diagnostics. This is where we have a set of prompts and we're just querying out. This isn't necessarily what someone would search, but this helps us understand how AI perceives your brand. So we say, what is X brand best known for? And the answer, when it's a fresh model that's not your biased work version of an AI model, is a really wonderful mirror of what are we positioned at, who are we positioned against. And so we have what we call aided and unaided prompts. So these aided ones being what is X brand best for, and then sort of saying who's best in X category and seeing who is turning up. And this understanding of brand and positioning is becoming absolutely critical, because I've heard it summed up with certain decision makers. They love these AI interfaces for its ability to do an advanced decision making, like scraping and condensing a lot of information to make a decision. And so this is where positioning really does become a big part of how you want to influence these tools, because you can't do everything at the depth that an LLM can scrape. So where will you play? How will you win? That's strategy. So that I just want to also jump back to this slide here is really interesting. As you think about your GEO strategy and measuring and optimizing your brand in this space and correlating it to revenue, a lot of this is coming down to having the right overall mix. We're seeing the get rich quick, the more spammy responses to optimizing an AI starting to get undone. They're no longer working and the models are getting smarter, just like SEO. Hey. And this report here is a really interesting summary. I would say this is ChatGPT industry citations. And what we see here is that in travel, across their sector, 54% of citations were from reviews in UGC. So when you think about your digital strategy, if you're in travel and tourism, it's heavily influenced by reviews in UGC. We've seen like Reddit posts influencing entire responses, and we've seen but this also makes sense when you think about the psychology of why people travel. Finance, really interesting, much lower on this UGC, but hugely influenced by finance related information, and then this kind of news and publishers. So this is really interesting for thinking about your digital mix as an organization and how much it's actually changing by segment. And so this is why we're huge fans of diagnosing how your brand is performing in this space through that prompt library, exporting those insights and informing what's actually informing our citations, what content is changing is influencing the narrative and prioritizing through that space, because it's so tailored is what we're seeing. The models are getting smarter. So we've kind of covered this. We've got like a bit of the playbook. That I want to land it there somewhere it's like lunchtime, and that's actually like a huge amount of information for you to think about. There's, again, we've not dived into entity diagnostics. There's things like ID and organization schema, and that whole, we could do a whole session on entity. There's that we haven't talked as much around tracking brand and the value of AI and tracking brand, and then other brand tracking solutions alongside this. There's a huge shift that I think that needs to happen in the content strategy in general. That, again, I've not talked about this. There's even more ways to measure AI, and there's lots of stuff kind of coming out in this space, and there's some really interesting stuff in the GEO space. So those are some things that I've particularly not talked about here. So please do ask me about it if that's prominent to you.